The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the black sedan. Her small frame and gentle features immediately drew skeptical glances from the group of seasoned soldiers gathered around the weapons display. At barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing no more than 120 pounds, she looked more like a college student than a military officer. The training facility buzzed with activity as dozens of military personnel prepared for the annual marksmanship demonstration. This wasn't just any ordinary training day. It was the prestigious interdivision competition where the best shooters from different military branches would showcase their skills before a panel of high-ranking officials, including General Robert Hayes, a decorated veteran known for his tough standards and no-nonsense approach to military excellence. Sarah had been transferred to this base just 3 weeks ago, and most of the soldiers didn't know much about her background. Her quiet demeanor and youthful appearance had led many to assume she was probably assigned to administrative duties, or perhaps worked in communications. The few who had bothered to ask learned she was involved in special operations training, but the vague description didn't reveal much about her actual capabilities. As she approached the registration table, Sergeant Martinez, a burly man with 20 years of service, looked up from his clipboard with barely concealed amusement. "You sure you're in the right place, miss? The civilian tour group meets at the main gate," he said with a smirk that spread across his weathered face. Sarah smiled politely and handed him her identification. "Captain Sarah Mitchell, reporting for the marksmanship competition," she said in a calm, steady voice that carried just enough authority to make the sergeant take a closer look at her credentials. Martinez's eyebrows shot up as he read her name on the official roster. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath, but his skeptical expression remained unchanged. "Says here you're registered for the precision rifle category. That's a pretty demanding competition, Captain. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer to start with something lighter?" The conversation had attracted the attention of several nearby soldiers, who began gathering around with curious expressions. Among them was Staff Sergeant Johnson, a tall, muscular man who held the base record for long-distance shooting. He crossed his arms and studied Sarah with an expression that mixed amusement with disbelief. "No offense, Captain, but those precision rifles weigh close to 20 pounds fully loaded," Johnson said, his voice carrying across the group. "Most guys need serious upper body strength just to hold them steady for more than a few minutes. Maybe you should consider the pistol competition instead." A chorus of chuckles rippled through the gathering crowd. Sarah noticed more soldiers stopping their preparations to observe the unusual scene. She had encountered this type of reaction countless times throughout her military career, and she had learned that the best response was usually patience combined with quiet confidence. "I appreciate your concern, Staff Sergeant, but I'm quite comfortable with precision rifles," Sarah replied, maintaining her composure despite the growing audience of skeptics. Lieutenant Davis, a young officer who was relatively new to the base himself, stepped forward with what he probably thought was a helpful suggestion. "Captain, maybe we could arrange for you to observe this year and participate next time after you've had more chance to train with the heavier weapons." The suggestion drew nods of agreement from several onlookers, who seemed to think this was a reasonable compromise that would save everyone from an embarrassing situation. Sarah could see in their faces that they genuinely believed they were being helpful, trying to protect her from what they assumed would be certain failure and humiliation. Before Sarah could respond, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "What seems to be the problem here?" General Hayes approached the group with long, purposeful strides. His presence immediately commanded respect, and the gathered soldiers quickly straightened to attention. Sergeant Martinez stepped forward to explain the situation. "Sir, we have Captain Mitchell here registered for the precision rifle competition, and the men were just expressing some concerns about whether she might be better suited for a different category." General Hayes studied Sarah with sharp, calculating eyes. He had spent 4 decades in the military and prided himself on being able to assess a soldier's capabilities at first glance. What he saw was a petite woman who looked like she would struggle to carry a heavy backpack, let alone handle a precision rifle in competition against some of the military's best marksmen. "Captain Mitchell," the general said, his tone professional but carrying an undertone of doubt, "this is a very challenging competition. The precision rifle category requires not only exceptional shooting skills, but also significant physical strength and endurance. The course includes shooting from various positions over several hours, often in difficult conditions. Sarah nodded respectfully. I understand the requirements, sir. I'm prepared to compete. The general studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Around them, the crowd of soldiers waited in anticipation, many already convinced that their commanding officer would make the sensible decision and redirect the young captain to a more appropriate competition. Very well, General Hayes finally said, though his tone suggested he was merely humoring her. But I want you to understand that there's no shame in recognizing one's limitations. If at any point during the competition you feel overwhelmed or unable to continue safely, you should withdraw immediately. Sarah nodded again. Understood, sir. As the crowd began to disperse, she could hear the whispered conversations and occasional chuckles from the departing soldiers. Most seemed to view her participation as an entertaining sideshow that would provide some amusement before the serious competitors took the stage. What none of them knew was that Captain Sarah Mitchell had a very different background than they imagined. But for now, she was content to let their assumptions remain unchallenged. She had learned long ago that actions spoke much louder than words, and she was looking forward to the opportunity to demonstrate exactly what those actions could accomplish. The weapons display area resembled a small arsenal, with various rifles, pistols, and specialized equipment arranged on tables under a large canvas tent. Sarah walked slowly among the displays, examining each weapon with the careful attention of someone who understood the subtle differences that could mean the difference between success and failure in competition. The precision rifles were indeed impressive specimens, long-barreled, heavy-duty weapons designed for accuracy at extreme distances. The standard competition rifle was a modified M24 sniper weapon system, weighing just over 18 pounds when fully loaded with its high-powered scope and bipod. For many soldiers, simply holding such a weapon steady for an extended period required considerable upper body strength. As Sarah picked up one of the rifles to examine its balance and feel, she noticed several competitors watching her with barely concealed amusement. Among them was Master Sergeant Thompson, a veteran marksman who had won the competition 3 years running. His massive frame and muscular arms made the heavy rifle look like a toy in his hands. "Careful there, Captain," Thompson called out with a grin that didn't quite hide his condescension. "Those aren't exactly lightweight sporting rifles. The recoil alone can knock someone off balance if they're not prepared for it." His comment drew chuckles from the other competitors, who seemed to find the situation increasingly entertaining. Sarah continued her examination of the weapon, noting the precision of its construction and the quality of the optics. She had worked with similar systems before, though she couldn't blame the others for their assumptions based on her appearance. Corporal Williams, a young soldier who had earned his place in the competition through months of dedicated training, approached with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Captain, if you don't mind me asking, how much experience do you have with precision rifles? I've been training with these weapons for over a year, and they're still challenging for me to handle properly." Sarah looked up from her inspection of the rifle's scope adjustments. "I've had some experience," she said simply, not elaborating on the extent or nature of that experience. The registration process continued around them as more competitors arrived and began examining the equipment. The atmosphere was typical of military competitions, a mixture of professional respect, friendly rivalry, and the underlying tension that came with knowing their performance would be evaluated by senior officers. Lieutenant Colonel Preston, the competition organizer, gathered the participants around a large tactical map that showed the course layout. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me explain today's competition format," he announced in a voice that carried easily across the group. The course was designed to test multiple aspects of precision shooting. Competitors would face targets at ranges from 300 to 800 meters, shooting from various positions including prone, sitting, and standing. The challenge included moving between firing positions under time constraints, simulating the conditions a sniper might face in actual combat situations. "Each competitor will have 90 minutes to complete the course," Preston explained, pointing to different locations on the map. "You'll start at position Alpha with 5 shots at 300 meters, then move to position Bravo for 5 shots at 500 meters from a sitting position. After that, you'll advance to position Charlie for the long-range challenge, 3 shots at 800 meters from prone position." Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the distances between positions and the terrain features that might affect shooting conditions. The course appeared well designed to challenge even experienced marksmen, requiring not only shooting accuracy, but also physical endurance and tactical awareness. The final phase will test your ability to engage multiple targets under pressure, Preston continued. At position Delta, you'll have 10 minutes to engage 6 different targets at varying ranges between 400 and 600 meters. This phase simulates the type of rapid target acquisition and engagement that might be required in operational situations. Master Sergeant Thompson raised his hand. Sir, what about wind conditions? The weather report shows gusts up to 15 knots from the southwest. Preston nodded. Good question. Wind will definitely be a factor today, especially for the longer range shots. Part of the challenge is reading and compensating for environmental conditions. Remember, in real-world situations, you don't get to wait for perfect weather. As the briefing continued, Sarah noticed General Hayes observing from a nearby vehicle, his expression unreadable as he watched the preparations. She could sense his skepticism about her participation, though he had been professional enough not to voice any direct objections after her initial registration. The other competitors began their final equipment checks, adjusting slings, checking ammunition, and making last-minute modifications to their rifles. Sarah methodically inspected her assigned weapon, testing the bolt action, examining the scope mounts, and checking the trigger mechanism with the practiced efficiency of someone thoroughly familiar with such equipment. Sergeant Martinez approached with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Captain, I need to ask one more time. Are you absolutely sure about this? The course is physically demanding, and some of these guys have been preparing for months. There's no shame in sitting this one out and observing how it's done. Before Sarah could answer, Staff Sergeant Johnson joined the conversation, his tone carrying a note of what might have been genuine worry. Martinez is right, Captain. I've seen strong, experienced soldiers struggle with this course. The rifle gets heavy after the first few positions, and if you're not used to the weight, it can throw off your accuracy pretty quickly. Sarah appreciated that their concerns seemed genuine rather than purely skeptical, but she remained determined to compete. I understand your concerns, gentlemen, but I'd like to give it a try. If I find I can't handle it, I'll withdraw as the general suggested. Her calm confidence puzzled the two sergeants, who exchanged glances that seemed to ask whether they were missing something important about this unassuming young officer. Around them, other competitors continued their preparations, most paying little attention to the conversation, but occasionally glancing over with expressions of curiosity or amusement. The first competitor was called to the starting line, and the formal competition began. As each marksman took their turn, Sarah observed their techniques and performance with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what she was watching. Her quiet analysis of each competitor's strengths and weaknesses would have impressed anyone knowledgeable enough to recognize the depth of her tactical understanding. The competition began with Master Sergeant Thompson taking the first position. His performance was impressive, demonstrating the skill and experience that had made him the 3-time defending champion. He moved through the course with practiced efficiency, his shots consistently finding their targets despite the challenging wind conditions that had developed throughout the morning. Sarah watched intently as each competitor took their turn, noting their shooting stances, breathing patterns, and how they compensated for environmental factors. The wind had indeed become a significant challenge, gusting unpredictably across the range and affecting bullet trajectory at the longer distances. Several experienced marksmen struggled with the conditions, their scores reflecting the difficulty of the course. Corporal Williams performed admirably for someone relatively new to competitive shooting, though his inexperience showed during the rapid engagement phase where he failed to acquire 2 of the 6 targets within the time limit. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, another veteran competitor, delivered a solid performance but seemed to struggle with fatigue during the final positions, his shots grouping wider than his usual standards. As Sarah's turn approached, she noticed the crowd of observers had grown considerably. Word had spread throughout the base about the unusual participant, and soldiers from various units had gathered to witness what many expected would be an entertaining but brief demonstration of why physical standards existed for certain military specialties. General Hayes had positioned himself at the observation area with several other senior officers, including Colonel Peterson from the Intelligence Division and Major Anderson from Special Operations. Their conversation was too quiet to overhear, but their occasional glances in Sarah's direction suggested she was the topic of discussion. "Captain Mitchell, you're up next," Lieutenant Colonel Preston announced, checking his watch and noting that the morning session was running slightly behind schedule. Sarah rose from her position at the equipment table, where she had been making final adjustments to her rifle scope. The weapon felt familiar in her hands despite being a different model from what she typically used. She had always possessed an intuitive understanding of firearms, able to adapt quickly to different systems and their individual characteristics. As she approached the starting position, the murmur of conversation from the gathered observers grew noticeably quieter. Many had positioned themselves where they could get a clear view of her performance, and the atmosphere carried an unusual tension that hadn't been present for the previous competitors. Master Sergeant Thompson, who had finished his run with an impressive score of 247 out of a possible 260 points, stood near the scoring table with his arms crossed. "This should be interesting," he muttered to Sergeant Martinez, who nodded in agreement while checking his stopwatch. Sarah settled into the prone position at position Alpha, adjusting her body alignment and checking her sight picture through the rifle's scope. The first targets were at 300 meters, a distance that most trained soldiers could handle reasonably well under ideal conditions. However, the crosswind had intensified, and she could see the distant target flags whipping back and forth in the gusting breeze. She took several slow, controlled breaths, allowing her heart rate to settle and her body to relax into the shooting position. Through the scope, she could see the target clearly, but she needed to calculate the wind's effect on her bullet's trajectory. The angle and intensity of the wind would push her shots to the left, requiring her to aim slightly right of center to compensate. Her first shot rang out across the range, the sound echoing off the surrounding hills. Through the scope, she could see the bullet hole appear in the target's 10 ring just slightly left of center. The wind compensation had been nearly perfect, but she made a small mental adjustment for her second shot. The second shot struck even closer to the center, drawing a surprised murmur from the watching crowd. Sarah's breathing remained steady and controlled as she prepared for her third shot, once again reading the wind conditions and making minute adjustments to her aim point. By the time she had completed all 5 shots at position Alpha, she had achieved a perfect score of 50 points. The observers fell silent as the results were announced, their expressions shifting from amusement to surprise and, in some cases, genuine confusion about how the small woman had managed such precision under difficult conditions. General Hayes leaned forward slightly, his skeptical expression beginning to show the first signs of serious interest. Colonel Peterson, who had been quietly dismissive of Sarah's participation, straightened in his chair and began paying much closer attention to the proceedings. Sarah efficiently gathered her equipment and moved to position Bravo, where she would engage targets at 500 meters from a sitting position. This stance was significantly more challenging than prone shooting, requiring greater upper body strength to maintain stability while supporting the heavy rifle without the benefit of lying flat on the ground. The sitting position also meant she had to hold the rifle's full weight in her arms and shoulders, exactly the kind of physical challenge that had prompted so many warnings about her ability to compete effectively. As she settled into position, several observers moved closer to get a better view of how she would handle the increased demands. She wrapped her left arm through the rifle sling, creating a stable shooting platform that distributed the weapon's weight more efficiently. Her position looked textbook perfect, demonstrating a level of technical knowledge that surprised many of the watching soldiers who had assumed her appearance indicated limited experience with such weapons. The 500-meter targets were significantly smaller in the scope, and the wind had become even more challenging as thermal currents began rising from the sun-heated ground. Sarah took her time analyzing the conditions, watching the mirage patterns through her scope, and observing how the distant grass bent in the shifting breeze. Her first shot at 500 meters struck the target's 9 ring, a result that would have been respectable for any competitor, but was slightly off her own high standards. She made a small adjustment to her wind compensation and prepared for her second shot, her concentration absolute despite the growing attention from the crowd of observers. The remaining 4 shots at position Bravo all found the 10 ring, giving her a combined score that placed her among the top performers of the day. The quiet confidence she had displayed throughout the morning was beginning to make sense to those watching, though many still couldn't understand how someone with her physical appearance could demonstrate such capability with precision rifles. The movement to position Charlie required a tactical approach across uneven terrain, simulating the conditions a sniper might encounter while repositioning during an actual mission. Sarah moved efficiently through the course, carrying her rifle and equipment with practiced ease that belied concerns about her physical capabilities. Position. Charlie presented the competition's greatest challenge, engaging targets at 800 meters while lying prone on a slight uphill slope. At this distance, even minor environmental factors could cause significant bullet deviation, and the elevated position added complexity to the ballistic calculations required for accurate shooting. General Hayes had moved closer to the firing line, his initial skepticism now replaced by genuine curiosity about Sarah's background and training. He stood near Lieutenant Colonel Preston, occasionally asking quiet questions about her performance and comparing her scores to the other competitors. "Where exactly did you say she transferred from?" the general asked, his tone carrying new respect for Sarah's demonstrated abilities. Preston consulted his clipboard. "Her orders show transfer from Fort Bragg, sir, but they're pretty general about her previous assignment. Just lists special operations training without specifics." The general nodded thoughtfully, filing away the information while continuing to observe Sarah's methodical preparation for the long-range shots. Her attention to detail in reading environmental conditions and calculating firing solutions was impressive, suggesting extensive training and experience that went well beyond basic marksmanship instruction. Sarah settled into her prone position, using her backpack to create additional stability for the heavy rifle. The target at 800 meters appeared tiny through her scope, and she spent several minutes studying the terrain between her position and the target, looking for indicators of wind direction and speed at various points along the bullet's flight path. The mirage patterns rising from the sun-heated ground provided valuable information about air currents and thermal activity that would affect her shots. She also observed the movement of grass and vegetation at different distances, building a mental map of the wind conditions she would need to account for in her calculations. Her first shot at 800 meters struck the target's 8 ring, a respectable result given the challenging conditions but not quite meeting her own standards. She spent additional time analyzing the shot placement and adjusting her compensation for the second attempt. The second shot hit the 9 ring, closer to her intended point of aim. Sarah made one final adjustment, based on her observations of how the previous 2 shots had been affected by the environmental conditions, then settled in for her third and final shot at the maximum distance. The third shot struck the 10 ring, dead center, drawing gasps of surprise from the gathered observers. Hitting the center of a target at 800 meters under windy conditions was a feat that impressed even the most experienced marksmen present, and many began reconsidering their initial assumptions about Sarah's capabilities. Master Sergeant Thompson, who had been watching with growing amazement, shook his head in disbelief. "I'll be damned," he muttered to Staff Sergeant Johnson. "That was a hell of a shot, especially for someone we've never seen compete before." Johnson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, and did you notice how she moves? There's something different about her technique. Like she's done this a lot more than just recreational shooting at the base range." As Sarah prepared to move to the final position, General Hayes approached Lieutenant Colonel Preston with a more serious expression. "Colonel, I want you to pull Captain Mitchell's complete service record after this competition. Something about her background doesn't add up with what we're seeing here." The final phase at Position Delta was designed to test rapid target acquisition and engagement skills under time pressure. 6 targets at various ranges between 400 and 600 meters had to be engaged within a 10-minute time limit, simulating the type of multiple target scenario that might occur during actual combat operations. This phase had proven challenging for many competitors throughout the day. The time pressure often caused even experienced shooters to rush their shots or fail to properly account for the different ranges and wind conditions affecting each target. Several competitors had missed targets entirely in their haste to complete the course within the time limit. Sarah approached Position Delta with the same methodical calm she had displayed throughout the competition. She spent the first minute carefully studying each target through her scope, noting their ranges and the different environmental conditions that would affect shots in each direction. Rather than rushing to begin shooting, she took time to plan her engagement sequence, deciding which targets to engage first based on factors like range, difficulty, and optimal body positioning. This tactical approach demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that impressed the military observers who understood the complexities involved. Her first target was at 450 meters, slightly to her left. The shot struck the 10 ring, and she immediately transitioned to the second target without hesitation. Her movements were smooth and efficient, showing none of the awkwardness or fatigue that might be expected from someone struggling with the rifle's weight. The second target fell to another center hit, followed quickly by the third and fourth targets. Sarah's performance had attracted the attention of every observer present, including several senior officers who had initially been skeptical about allowing her to participate in the competition. Colonel Peterson, who had been quietly dismissive earlier in the day, leaned over to General Hayes with a puzzled expression. "Bob, I've been watching military competitions for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone handle rapid multiple target engagement with that level of precision. Her technique is absolutely flawless." The general nodded grimly, his earlier concerns about Sarah's participation now replaced by intense curiosity about her true background and training. "That's not recreational shooting, Tom. That's advanced tactical training, and a lot of it." Sarah's fifth target fell to another perfect hit, leaving only one target remaining with more than 4 minutes still remaining on the time limit. Rather than rushing to complete the course, she took additional time to ensure her final shot met the same standards as the previous ones. The final shot struck the center of the last target, completing a perfect score on the rapid engagement phase. The watching crowd fell silent as the implications of her performance began to sink in. This wasn't simply good shooting. It was demonstration-level marksmanship that suggested extensive specialized training. As Sarah secured her rifle and prepared to leave the firing line, General Hayes stepped forward with an expression that mixed respect with growing suspicion about what he had just witnessed. The final scores were calculated while Sarah cleaned and returned her rifle to the equipment table. The range fell unusually quiet as word spread about her perfect performance in the rapid engagement phase, combined with her near-perfect scores at all other positions. Even the most experienced competitors gathered around the scoring table, with expressions of amazement and curiosity. Lieutenant Colonel Preston double-checked his calculations before announcing the results. Sarah's combined score of 258 out of 260 possible points was not only the highest of the day, but exceeded the previous competition record by 6 points. The achievement was made even more remarkable by the challenging wind conditions that had affected all other competitors throughout the morning. Master Sergeant Thompson approached Sarah with genuine respect, extending his hand in congratulation. "Captain, that was absolutely incredible shooting. I've been competing for 8 years and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished out there." Sarah accepted the handshake with characteristic modesty. "Thank you, Sergeant. The conditions were challenging, but the equipment was excellent and the course was well designed." Her humble response only added to the growing intrigue surrounding her background. Most exceptional shooters, particularly those competing at this level, typically showed more obvious pride in their achievements or were eager to discuss their training and techniques with fellow marksmen. Staff Sergeant Johnson joined the conversation with obvious admiration. "Captain, if you don't mind me asking, where did you learn to shoot like that? I mean, your technique was flawless, and the way you handled multiple target engagement was like watching a textbook demonstration." Before Sarah could respond, General Hayes approached the group with purposeful strides and an expression that indicated he wanted immediate answers to questions that had been building throughout the morning. "Captain Mitchell," the general said, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting straightforward responses, "I think we need to have a conversation about your background and training. What you just demonstrated goes well beyond standard military marksmanship instruction." Sarah straightened to attention, recognizing the shift in the general's demeanor from skeptical observer to commanding officer seeking information. "Yes, sir. What would you like to know?" "Let's start with where you received your sniper training," Hayes said directly. "Because what I just watched was not the performance of someone with basic rifle qualification. That was advanced tactical shooting at a level I've only seen from our most elite units." The gathering crowd of soldiers and officers listened intently as Sarah considered her response. She had known that her performance would eventually raise questions about her background, but she had hoped to avoid detailed explanations about her previous assignments. "Sir, I received specialized training at Fort Bragg as part of my previous assignment," she said carefully. providing technically accurate information without revealing specifics about the nature of that training. General Hayes studied her for a long moment, clearly recognizing that her response was deliberately vague. "Captain, Fort Bragg hosts multiple specialized training programs. I need you to be more specific about which program provided this level of training." Colonel Peterson stepped forward, having overheard the conversation. "General, with your permission, I might be able to provide some context. I've been making some calls about Captain Mitchell's background." Hayes nodded for him to continue, while Sarah maintained her composed expression despite knowing that her carefully guarded privacy was about to be compromised. "Sir," Peterson continued, consulting notes he had made during phone conversations, "Captain Mitchell was assigned to the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta for the past 3 years. According to my contact at Bragg, she was one of their most skilled precision shooters and served multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq." A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathered crowd. Delta Force, officially known as the 1st SFOD, was among the military's most elite and secretive units. Members were selected from the most capable soldiers in the armed forces and received training that far exceeded standard military instruction. The revelation explained not only Sarah's exceptional shooting skills but also her modest demeanor and reluctance to discuss her background. Delta Force operators were trained to avoid attention and maintain low profiles, characteristics that extended to their behavior even in non-operational settings. General Hayes's expression shifted to one of respect, mixed with embarrassment at having initially doubted her capabilities. "Captain, why didn't you mention your Delta Force background when you registered for this competition?" Sarah maintained her professional composure while answering. "Sir, I've found that people often react differently when they learn about my previous assignment. I prefer to be evaluated based on my current performance, rather than preconceived notions about my background." The general nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom behind her approach. He had witnessed firsthand how soldiers sometimes became either overly deferential or unnecessarily competitive when dealing with special operations personnel, neither of which contributed to effective working relationships. Master Sergeant Thompson, who had been listening with growing amazement, shook his head in wonder. "Ma'am, I have to apologize for all the comments about the rifle being too heavy and suggesting you try the pistol competition instead. We had no idea who we were talking to." Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "Sergeant, you had no way of knowing, and your concerns were reasonable based on what you could observe. I actually appreciated that everyone was trying to be helpful, even if their assumptions were incorrect." Staff Sergeant Johnson laughed, but his amusement was directed at himself rather than the situation. "Captain, when we were worried about you handling the rifle's weight, you were probably thinking about all the times you've had to carry much heavier equipment across much more challenging terrain than a flat shooting range." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of additional senior officers who had heard about the exceptional performance and wanted to meet the competition winner. Among them was Brigadier General Williams from the Special Operations Command, who immediately recognized Sarah's name from operational reports he had received during her deployments. "Captain Mitchell," General Williams said with obvious pleasure, "I should have known you were behind today's exceptional shooting. Your reputation preceded you, though apparently not everyone here was aware of your background." General Hayes extended his hand to Sarah with genuine respect and a slight smile that acknowledged his earlier skepticism. "Captain, I owe you an apology for my initial reaction. Your performance today was outstanding, and I'm honored to have such skilled personnel assigned to this installation." The atmosphere on the range had completely transformed from the morning's skeptical curiosity to genuine respect and professional admiration. Word of Sarah's background and performance spread quickly throughout the base, creating a buzz of conversation that would continue for weeks among the personnel who had witnessed the day's events. General Hayes invited Sarah to join the senior officers for the traditional post-competition briefing, where her insights about the course design and shooting conditions were welcomed as valuable feedback from someone with exceptional expertise. Her observations about wind patterns and target placement demonstrated the tactical knowledge that came from real-world operational experience. During the briefing, she also provided constructive suggestions for future competitions, recommending modifications that would better simulate actual combat scenarios while maintaining appropriate safety standards. Her recommendations reflected deep understanding of both competitive shooting and practical field applications. Master Sergeant Thompson approached her after the briefing with a request that would become common in the following weeks. Captain, I was wondering if you might be willing to provide some advanced training for our competitive shooting team. We could all benefit from learning some of the techniques you demonstrated today. Sarah agreed to help with training, recognizing it as an opportunity to share knowledge while building positive relationships with her new colleagues. Her willingness to mentor others despite her superior skills earned additional respect from personnel who had initially been skeptical about her capabilities. Over the following months, Sarah's training sessions became highly sought after, not only for the technical instruction, but also for the professional approach she brought to developing other soldiers' capabilities. She focused on fundamentals while gradually introducing advanced techniques, ensuring that each student progressed at an appropriate pace. The shooting teams that trained under her guidance began achieving unprecedented success in regional competitions, bringing recognition to the base and validating the effectiveness of her instruction methods. Her emphasis on mental discipline, environmental awareness, and tactical thinking elevated the entire program standards. General Hayes often observed these training sessions, impressed by Sarah's ability to communicate complex concepts in ways that soldiers could understand and implement. Her teaching style reflected the same quiet confidence and patience she had displayed during the competition, making her an effective mentor for personnel at all skill levels. During one conversation after a particularly successful training session, the general asked about her transition from special operations to conventional military assignment. Captain, how are you finding the adjustment to a more traditional military environment after your time with Delta Force? Sarah considered the question thoughtfully before responding. Sir, it's been interesting to work with soldiers who haven't had the same specialized training, but everyone here is dedicated and eager to learn. The fundamentals of good soldiering are the same regardless of the unit, and I'm enjoying the opportunity to contribute to developing our personnel's capabilities. Her diplomatic answer reflected the professionalism that had made her successful in special operations while acknowledging the value of her current assignment. The general noted her ability to find meaning in different types of military service, a characteristic that marked truly exceptional officers. 6 months later, when the annual competition was held again, Sarah was invited to serve as a guest instructor rather than compete, ensuring fair competition while allowing others to benefit from her expertise. Her presence elevated the entire event standards and inspired participants to achieve higher levels of performance. The range where she had first been told the rifle was too heavy now bore a plaque commemorating her record-setting performance, though she had requested that it emphasize the importance of not judging capabilities by appearances, rather than celebrating individual achievement. The inscription read, "Excellence comes in many forms. Never assume limitations based on first impressions." Years later, soldiers who had been present that day still told the story of the quiet captain who had surprised everyone with her exceptional abilities. The tale became part of the base's unofficial history, serving as a reminder about the dangers of making assumptions based on physical appearance. Sarah's influence extended far beyond marksmanship training. Her approach to leadership, emphasizing competence over preconceptions, began affecting how personnel evaluated each other throughout the installation. Officers started paying more attention to actual performance, rather than relying on superficial impressions when making assignments and recommendations. The competitive shooting program she had helped establish became a model for other military installations, with requests for her training materials and methodologies coming from bases across the country. Her systematic approach to developing precision shooting skills was eventually incorporated into official training manuals. During her final year at the base, Sarah was promoted to major and given responsibility for overseeing all marksmanship training programs in the region. Her new position allowed her to implement the lessons learned from her own experience with prejudgment and bias, ensuring that training opportunities were available to all qualified personnel regardless of their physical characteristics. The most lasting impact of that memorable competition day wasn't her record-breaking score, but rather the cultural shift it prompted toward evaluating people based on their demonstrated capabilities, rather than assumptions about their limitations. Sarah had proven that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected sources, and that wisdom became embedded in the base's training philosophy. When she eventually transferred to her next assignment, the farewell ceremony included testimonials from dozens of soldiers whose careers had been positively influenced by her mentorship and example. General Hayes, in his remarks, noted that her greatest achievement wasn't her shooting record but her demonstration that true leadership meant helping others overcome their own preconceptions and biases. The shooting range continued to host annual competitions, but participants now understood that the most important lesson wasn't about marksmanship technique or equipment handling. Instead, it was about the importance of keeping an open mind and recognizing that exceptional capability could come in forms that defied conventional expectations. Sarah's legacy lived on in every soldier who remembered to look beyond surface appearances and give others the opportunity to prove their worth through performance rather than prejudgment.